Last time that we left our couple, Jason and Susan, we found out that one individual was at the train station and the other individual was at a restaurant that they used to frequent called the station. There was a simple misunderstanding. Now, both individuals thought they heard the right thing, but they misunderstood or assumed they knew what the other person was thinking. Now, as each individual is waiting for the other, there's a lot of things going on in their minds. They're starting to question themselves. Susan's asking, maybe Jason wants to break up. Maybe he's found somebody else. And Jason is questioning himself. Maybe Susan didn't think I was making enough money. Maybe she really doesn't want to marry me. Should I ask her to marry me? Well, both of these individuals are doing what we call self-talk. And a lot of this is based on ourself and how we communicate within ourself. That's what we're going to look at today. If you look at this target, I try to think of this target like I would an onion. In an onion, if you've ever picked up an onion right out of the supermarket, the outer skin you can pull off fairly easily. And then the secondary layers of skin is a little bit tougher to pull off with your fingers. And finally, the inner core is the hardest to pull off. So let's look at the outer layer of skin on this chart. This is attitudes. Our attitudes are our learned predispositions to respond favorably or unfavorably to something. In other words, this is kind of like our likes and our dislikes. You may like pizza. You may like tacos. You may be more of a dog person than a cat person. But these type of attitudes can change over time, especially the older we get. For example, I bet there's a certain type of food that you probably loved at one time, but whenever you started eating that food and you got sick, you probably don't want to ever eat that food again. Or maybe there was something that you didn't like when you were younger and now that you like. Maybe a certain TV show. It could even be coffee. Maybe you've acquired a taste of coffee. Both of these are our attitudes, and just like that outer layer of skin on the onion, it can be changed over time. The second layer is our beliefs. And this is what we believe to be true or false, the way in which we structure reality. You may believe that your favorite football team is going to be good this year. And you might even have some facts to back it up. You might think that the defense is going to play good and the offensive line is going to be good. And then after about the 6th or 7th game of the season, and if your favorite football team hasn't won a game, now your belief that the football team is going to be good this year has changed. You still like the football team, but you're not as confident as you was before. And it took quite a few games for you to get the facts and make out a structure of reality, whether it be false or true. Then the final one is that inner core. This is our values. This is why we call it our core values. This is what makes us, us. The enduring concepts of what is right and wrong. We kind of look at this as good and bad. You may value truth. You may believe that God is good, or that your parents love you. These are what is in our inner being, and these are the most difficult to change. A lot of these values came from our family or our grandparents. And I bet if we looked at our significant others and our best friends, they probably share the same values that we do. Now in the text, there's a person named William James, and he was a philosopher, and he identified 3 components of the self. He called it the material self, the social self, and the spiritual self. Now the material self, this is just like the term describes. This is our material things that we have. And we compare ourselves to others, especially whenever we have a high value of material self. We may think that we are rich or we are poor. We may look at ourselves and think, I don't have the very best clothes, or I need to have the very best clothes. We value our being on material things that we have. Then there's another aspect of this called the social self. The social self, this is the concept of self as reflected in our reactions with other people. You may be a people person. If you go to a get-together or a party, you may be one of those people that you don't know a stranger. You'll go right up and talk to other people. But then again, you may be one of these people that would stand back and scan the room, and if you wait for somebody to come up and talk to you, then you'll be friendly. Some people are introverts and extroverts. You know how you interact with people, and you know if you're popular among people. You may be one of these type of people that whenever your friends get to know you, then they'll say that you're very extroverted. But when it comes to strangers, you may be introverted. And then the last one is spiritual self. This is the purpose or our reason in life. This is where we look at things with an introspection of our morals and our values. If you look at these three things, according to William James, they sound a lot like the three pieces of the onion that we just looked at. Now, there's a few theories that we're going to look at throughout the semester. And this first one is the social learning theory. This is a theory that suggests the behavior that people learn, we can adapt that behavior towards others. Now, this is more of a type of theory that suggests when we're around others, we can adapt our personality. And we've all done this one time or the other. Whenever you're talking with people that talk very quietly, eventually you will lower your voice to meet their tone. We can do this, and we'll talk about this when we enter our chapter on conflict. You can actually control the situation. If people are talking louder, you can lower your voice tone like this, and it won't take very long for other people to match that voice tone. It may take a few minutes, but other people will eventually match your voice tone. So we can control situations, and we can look at the way other people are acting. If you walk into a group and everybody is angry and yelling, you'll probably have that same personality through that discussion. So things kind of happen in certain circumstances, and eventually we just adapt to those. Now, some people are better at this than others. The book calls it face, and we can think of this as saving face. Now, whenever we save face, or face work, as the text calls it, is basically a way that we give excuses, and we shouldn't do this. For example, that preventative face work, you're going to make an excuse before the incident happens. For example, if you think you may be late for school, you will tell a student or another co-student, maybe even the professor, hey, if I'm late, it's because of this traffic and they're doing some work on the street. You're making up an excuse even before the event takes place. Now, the other one is corrective face work. This is where you're going to make an excuse after the event takes place. Maybe you'll walk into class and tell the professor, oh, the reason I was late was because blah, blah, blah. Now, you want to be truthful, and sometimes things happen. But if you have it in the back of your mind that you're going to make an excuse before it happens, or even after the fact. Let's say if it was that same example of they were doing some work on the street. Well, if you knew they were going to do some work on the street, you should have prepared earlier so you wouldn't be late for class. It's always best to be honest, but we don't want to continue to give excuses for everything that we do. When we do, we are pretty much living our life by giving excuses. We're always going to be holding ourselves back because anytime we fail, we want to make ourselves look good, which is we want to save face. This isn't a good way to approach life and approach reality. If we mess up, we need to say, it was my fault and I'm sorry. Only person we can blame is ourselves. Now there's 7 important ways we can use to increase our self-esteem. Now the text talks about self-worth and self-esteem, and they're really the same thing. So don't get confused with those two terms. We use self-esteem most of the time, but in psychology a lot of times, and even in sociology, they'll use self-worth, but both terms are used interchangeably. One thing we can do to increase our self-esteem is called self-talk, where we need to engage in self-talk. This is intrapersonal communication, what we talked about in Chapter 1. And a good example of this was Lance Armstrong. When Lance Armstrong found out that he had cancer, one of the things that he said, and he said this in a conference in the media, he said, cancer picked the wrong person. In other words, he was saying, I can do this. This was a challenge, and he was going to rise up to the challenge. He engaged in positive self-talk. The second one is visualization. If you see it, you should be able to believe it, and then you should be able to achieve it. Whenever I was driving to graduate school, I was working full-time, and at the time I had to drive from Ashland to Moorhead. So I'd work all day, and then I'd drive all the way down to school in the evening. And after a while, it really started getting old. I was spending all my mornings before work writing papers, all my weekends writing papers, and then it was the very second I left work, I was in the car headed down to school to spend the entire evening at school. But one of the things that I did was, as I was driving to school, every time I passed Ashland Community Technical College, and when I passed the technical college out at Technology Drive, I kept looking over there saying, someday I'm going to graduate and I'm going to teach there. And I did this as I drove past Kentucky Christian University. I kept telling myself and visualizing what it would be like standing up in front of a group of students and lecturing. It took quite a few years for me to get through that, but eventually I did. I could see it, I could feel it, I believed it, and I accomplished it. So self-talk and visualization can help us not only achieve our goals, but continue to help us raise our self-esteem. And we also want to avoid comparing ourselves to others. You know, we're going to be harder on ourselves than other people will be. Usually we see ourselves differently. And if we continue to compare ourselves to others, we'll probably look at ourselves that we can't compete with the other people. We shouldn't do this because other people will see ourselves better than we see ourselves. So try to avoid comparing yourself. It's always good to be competitive and want to be like that other person. There's nothing wrong with that. But don't continue to compare yourself to the other person. Number 4 is reframe. Reframing is the process of redefining events and experiences from different points of view. Just like in the movie Dumb and Dumber. Whenever one of the characters asked this lady, do I have a chance of going out with you? And she said, 1 in a million. And he smiled and said, so you're still saying I've got a chance? Well, that's really not what he was saying, she was saying, but he reframed it, taking something that was negative into something that was positive. For example, if you get a bad grade on an exam, don't think of it as, I just failed this exam, I'm going to fail the class. I always like to think of it as it's like a dog that's been in a fight. The dog that's been in a fight might stick its tail between its legs, walk out a few steps, maybe walk out of the yard, lick its wounds, and then get right back in there. That's the way you need to look at it. You reframe it and say, every experience I'm going to experience, I'm going to learn from it and do better. Number 5 is to develop honest or positive relationships. You need to have that one good friend, somebody that's not going to continue to hold you back. Because having the significant other in your life, whether it be a parent or your husband or your wife, somebody that needs to be there right beside of you telling you that you can do it. And then you need to be that somebody for the friend whenever they need you, to be positive and to be honest. You don't want people to tell you what you want to hear. You want people to be honest, and you want to be honest with the other people as well. Number 6 is to let go of the past. You need to focus on the future. You know, ourselves, we seem that we want to resist change. Not everybody likes change, but change is good. Looking back at what we can't change only reinforces a sense of helplessness. And we need to change the thought of I can't and I won't. A lot of times people will say, I can't do that. But they're really saying, I won't do that. You need to take that next step. And the last one is to seek support. That's why we have best friends. And that's why counselors are there. Whenever people want to lose weight, they go to clubs like Weight Watchers. There's other people that's in the same boat. Or if people want to quit smoking, it's good to be around other people that's trying to quit smoking. So we need to have support. Sometimes this may mean that we need to get new friends. There's a term called self-fulfilling prophecy that's in our text. And self-fulfilling prophecy is basically a prediction about the future actions that is likely to come true because we believe that it will come true. If you say that, oh, I hate math class, I know I'm going to fail this class. Oh, I've got math homework, I know I'm going to miss all these problems. If you continue to tell yourself that, you will probably fail the class. So self-fulfilling prophecy, if you want to think in positive terms in intrapersonal communication, that's a lot like self-talk. You need to tell yourself that I can do it. You may be the first person in your family to graduate from college, but if you continue to have a positive attitude and work, you can do it. Another term in the text they call self-disclosure, purposefully providing information about yourself to others that they would not learn if you did not tell them. Here's the important part of self-disclosure. You have to volunteer the information. Somebody can't force you to self-disclose, because self-disclosing is kind of dangerous. You might think, well, what if they use this information against me? And they could. But self-disclosure is also positive because you can help people. You can maybe give an example of a problem that you had in the past, and here's how you overcome that problem. And the text talks about a couple of different types of self-esteem. Low self-esteem and high self-esteem. And there's quite a few bullet points that I would like for you to look at and think about. But I've listed just a couple of characteristics of both low and high. If we look at the first part, characteristics of low self-esteem, these people are more sensitive to criticism and feedback, and they're often more critical of others. If you know somebody that's like that, that doesn't like to be criticized, and they're always critical of you or other people that you may know, if we dig down deep inside, we'll probably find out that they have very low self-esteem. And characteristics of high self-esteem can be exactly the opposite. These people think more highly of others. You'd probably think, well, if you have high self-esteem, you probably think more highly of yourself. And that is not necessarily true. A lot of people that think highly of themselves actually have low self-esteem. They're building themselves up higher than they really should be. If somebody is always encouraging, they probably have high self-esteem. If they're more likely to admit their strengths and especially their weaknesses, they probably have high self-esteem. If they're willing to learn from their mistakes or tell you that they were wrong, they probably have high self-esteem. Now, there's 5 levels of communication, and this isn't in the text. And if you look at this screen, we start from the top and we work our way down to the bottom. So if we start at the very top, we can think of this as your very first day in college. Whenever you walked into a classroom, if you saw somebody sitting there or close to you, you may just say, hello. Well, that's a cliche. You might say, how are you doing? And it's kind of impersonal. You're not really concerned about their health, but you're just making small talk. So that's really one of the lowest levels as we work from low to high. Just a cliche. Then maybe as the conversation goes on, you start going in more and towards facts and information. You may ask, well, what is your major? And maybe, what have you heard about this professor? What have you heard about this class? You're both becoming an interviewer and an interviewee. So that conversation is becoming more dyadic. And then it gets into the attitude stage. This is where you or the other person may talk more about what they like or what they hate. I hate getting in front of people and giving speeches. I hate having an 8 o'clock in the morning class. Then the conversation may go more into personal matters, where they start talking about failures and fears and dreams. They may say, oh, if I fail this semester, I don't know how I'm going to support my family. I need this degree to get this promotion at my job, or I may even lose my job. Now it's getting really into more personal matters. Now the very top level of communication is called peak. This is very rare and usually, and I want to underline usually, happens in intimate relationships. Maybe you and your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your husband or your wife, maybe one of you have reached peak communication. You talk about your fears and your failures and what went on at work. Maybe the other person hasn't reached that level, and they may not reach that level. A lot of this also may have something to do with the way we were raised. Were we able to express our feelings? And if one person is at peak communication and the other isn't, a lot of times one person that's at peak communication may think the other is hiding something. Well, I'll tell you everything that's gone on with me, but you haven't said anything about you. What are you trying to hide? And the other person may feel, why are you telling me all this information? That's too much information. I don't need to know that. It's great whenever both people in the relationship has reached peak communication, but I want to underline that this is rare. It's good, but it's rare. And it's not wrong if you haven't reached peak communication. And I also want you to know the difference between assertiveness and aggressiveness. And there are differences. It's okay to be assertive, and you want to be assertive as you work your way up in your career and as you work your way through college. but aggressiveness shouldn't be tolerated by a lot of people. And this is just a couple of words for you to think about and for you to come up with your own definitions of the similarities and the differences between both assertiveness and aggressiveness. And another term I want to mention that's mentioned in the text is called communibiological approach. Now, we talked about social learning theory, where you learn and adapt to that situation. But the communibiological approach says that there are certain traits that we're born with. Now, we can eventually grow out of those, but you may just be born as an introvert or as an extrovert. I've noticed that you can see this with preschool kids and daycare kids. There's some kids that are just outgoing. Other kids watch and maybe become followers. Maybe whenever you were in grade school, you were shy, but eventually you could grow out of that shyness. Either way, there are some traits that we're born with, and some of these traits that the communibiological approach says we can even adapt, which is kind of what the social learning theory suggests. But the text goes into a little more detail than that.